to the Denver City Council Finance and Governance Committee. My name is Kendra Black. I chair this committee and I represent District 4 in Southeast Denver. Let's start with introductions with Councilwoman Torres.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jamie Torres, Council District 3.
Well, I'll go. I'm Paul Cashman, South Denver, District 6. I'm wondering about Mr. Flynn over there.
Oh, Kendra left me out, so I suppose she'll get to the bottom of the list. Kevin Flynn, Southwest Denver, District 2.
Good afternoon, Joel Clark, District 7.
Chris Hines, Denver's Perfect 10.
Good afternoon, Stacy Gilmore, District 11.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Deborah Ortega, City Council at Large.
Robin Kniech, the other at large. Good afternoon.
All right, thank you everyone for being here. We just have one action item, and it is to approve a lease agreement with the Southwest Improvement Council. And just as a reminder, the lease has already been signed by the Southwest Improvement Council. And Lisa Lemley from our real estate department will give us a presentation. And I know Councilwoman Torres is very familiar with this situation and can probably answer some questions about it. And Lisa, before you begin, I want to welcome Councilwoman Seda Baca. And you can take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. We are here to seek approval for the lease agreement with Southwest Improvement Council. And Kiki is driving for me. So it is the best practice of real estate that when leases, lengthy leases come up at the end of term, we do at a certain point go out to, we evaluate the space for city uses, for community uses to make sure it's all still aligned. We are talking about an RFP at the end of this term for the community. Or it would be done this year, but for the end of the term. So this is located at 1000 South Lowell Boulevard. It is a multi-purpose building that is city-owned. It is the only city-owned asset on the west side of town that is not parks, a library, or Dottie. We intend, the lease was drafted as a 2-year lease, which would expire on 12/31/2021. We have been working, real estate's been working with Councilwoman Torres on the plans for community outreach for listening sessions to develop the key priorities for that community center. So the outline for you in red is the entire parcel, and which the SWIC building itself to the south there, then it also houses the library. It's a small branch, about 900 to 1,000 square feet. The building overall is approximately 28,000 square feet. Mile High Montessori then is on the northern part of the parcel. Both users share the parking lot with some common ingress egress. So in the early 1990s and 2000s, DITO, at that time Economic Development, oversaw community centers and the leases that went with them. As one of those, they oversaw the Southwest Improvement Council lease for 1000 South Lowell that started, my records only go back to 1993, but these have been $1 a year leases. Starting in 2005 through 2008, the city invested approximately $3.5 million towards capital improvements. The majority of those funds came from the 1998 Neighborhood Bond Program. In 2010, a 2-year lease agreement was extended through 2012 and provided SWIC a mutual option to purchase the building for $10. This was a mutual option requiring the city's agreement and approval to sell. In 2012, SWIC did submit a letter expressing interest to purchase the building. Following that letter expressing interest, DITO transferred the transaction to real estate. After discussion with key internal stakeholders, the city determined it would not sell the building, but would extend the lease with SWIC. The key factors for not selling the building is that, as I stated earlier, this is one of the only multi-facility or multi-purpose facility on the west side. And we knew even, you know, in 2012, we were talking about Westwood in the neighborhood and needs that we knew were going to need to be addressed in the upcoming years. The city attorney's office had also had strong concerns regarding the sale of an asset for $10 when we had just invested all of the, you know, the millions of dollars in it just a few years prior. And then lastly, we did have concerns about the Denver Public Library because there was no guarantee long-term on what would happen to it in the building. So after many discussions at that time with the then executive director for SWIC, they declined to sign the lease amendment because the city would not keep the purchase agreement, the purchase option in the lease. So we allowed SWIC to remain in a holdover position, which is basically a 30-day, rolling 30-day agreement for the $1 a year. Beginning in 18 with their new executive director and on multiple occasions after that, the real estate met with their executive director and members of their board. We shared the history of what had transpired up to this point, as well as just the lease itself, as well as why we did not exercise that option to for them to purchase it, why we did not sell it. In 2019, here in the Webb building, we had a meeting with some of the board members, and we did inform SWIC that we would be terminating the lease. So that it was a combination of looking at internal city needs, as well as then this engaging the community to see what other community uses were appropriate. And best practice, again, knowing that at this time, after 30 some odd years, it is time for an RFP. We sent the lease agreement to them on November 15th of 2019 for execution. So our next steps, we intend, and working with Councilwoman Torres, in this first quarter of 2021 on listening sessions in the community to understand the neighborhood visions for that community center. Consistent with real estate's policy and in collaboration, we'll be working with other city agencies. We will still look to determine if there are any internal applicable uses for that building. We intend by the end of Q2, Q3, and if there is surplus available, that we would issue an RFP for the space. If we are successful with the RFP process, we would intend then to bring a new lease forward to City Council for approval at the end of 2021. So the request today is to approve the lease agreement with Southwest Improvement Council for $20 with a term through December 31st of 2021 to lease a portion of 1000 South Lowell Boulevard to be used as a community center in Council District 3.
Thank you, Lisa. And just to confirm what I said right before I introduced you is that they have now signed the lease.
Correct. They signed it and sent it to us in December, I believe, end of November, December. Correct.
Okay. And I see Zoom has changed the color of the hand, so I didn't see that. Councilwoman Ortega has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Lisa, thank you for reaching out and talking with me last week. And, you know, I grew up in this neighborhood, and this property has been around for serving the community. SWIC has been the primary operator for many, many years. 33, I think, is the correct number. So can you tell us exactly what programs are taking place in the building right now that are offered by SWIC or by any of their partners?
I would need to pull out a report, so I probably can't name everything. I will tell you what I'm aware of. There are leagues that are held in the gym, and we know that this will be part of our internal vetting, is that Parks has already said they would absolutely still continue that and run it through Parks. as an auxiliary site to the Westwood Rec Center.
Are
So-
those run by Parks right now?
No, well, although that's not true. SWIC had told me that Parks sometimes leases it or uses, there's some kind of lease that they do, and lease may not be the right term since it's once again a city-owned asset, but they do allow Parks to use it sometimes.
Okay. And what are some of the other programs?
Mile High Montessori has 2 classrooms there.
Right.
In addition to the building across the parking lot. And I've spoken with Mile High Montessori a number of times, so they are aware of what is going on and know that we will not leave anybody in the lurch while we're going through this process, as well as they would be encouraged to respond to the RFP if they think that their need is continuing to grow. We know.
So just to be clear though, because it's my understanding the lease for the entire property is with SWIC, although we have Mile High Montessori and the library as tenants. Besides,
We do not have Mile High Montessori. They are subleasing it to them and charging them a rent to be there. Now,
Okay.
the library, we over the years have had to carve out because there was a point in the past where the library was paying a market rent and we had to change.
Okay, so that's not a sublease to.
Correct. In the truest sense, we're not looking at it. It was incorporated originally in their premises definition. And so by virtue of that, you'll see it in this because we're acknowledging that they still have they open and close the building, SWIC does. So there is a little bit of an overlap. But the library is not charged rent, but we are paying our operating expenses.
Okay, and then what are the specific programs run by SWIC?
Let me see. I'll just bear with me one
And
second.
I don't know if Larry Ambrose is
Well, Councilwoman, I can answer on a basic level, and then if you
Go
have
ahead.
additional questions
Okay.
for Larry, I believe
Yeah.
he may be there. So
Okay.
I'm looking at a report from 2020. So they are saying that they do have a food bank. And they do food distribution through, it looks like Meals on Wheels. They have housing, counseling, and I don't know that all of this is on a regular basis. So, I mean, I don't know if it's quarterly scheduled but they're not all in the building all at the same time. So, exercise, sewing, arts, crafts, bingo. Once again, there is the gym. I would say that is it in terms of, and then some health, dental, nutrition programs that they serve for seniors.
okay. And would you say that the majority of the programs that you just outlined target a particular segment of the community, or is it pretty broad ranging in terms of age and general demographics of
I
those?
can't answer that, but I may defer to Councilwoman Torres, who I do believe has a good sense of her community that's being served there, if you don't mind.
Councilwoman Torres, do you want to?
Sure,
you
sure.
want to do
And Larry can probably be more specific
Okay.
about the individual programming because I don't know that it's the same between different offerings, kind of which segment of the community. But to my impression of SWIC is that it offers food bank to anyone, meals largely to seniors in Southwest Denver, and then housing counseling probably to anyone.
Okay. Can we let Larry in? I only have a couple more questions after this, and I see that we've got a number of colleagues in the queue, so I don't want to take up the whole time.
Yeah, Zach, can you let Larry in, please?
Larry Ambrose?
Go ahead, Larry.
Okay, I think I'm on now.
Can
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. I think you covered a lot of it. We do congregate meals, Meals on Wheels, food pantry, um, different programs for seniors. We also, in addition to doing housing counseling, have foreclosure counseling, home buyer education, which is a considerable part of the activities we do. In terms of who we serve, um, about 51% of the people we serve are Latino, about 14% Native American, um, somewhere around 8% Asian American. Um, that has changed over the last few months in terms of who we serve during COVID. Obviously, during COVID, our programs, nobody's been allowed in the building except staff. So we have increased our food pantry levels to somewhere around a total of 250 families, and a larger number of Asian Americans taking advantage of those programs. But that's basically who we serve. In terms of the gymnasium, we have varsity athletics, adult leagues, we have community soccer leagues. One of the things that I've heard is that the building is underutilized. I think that started a few years ago um, under the former councilman, that idea, but it just simply isn't true. We can't use the gym very much in the summertime because it's not air conditioned. But in normal times, the gymnasium is heavily utilized by Denver Public Schools, adult leagues, and community soccer leagues, mostly soccer leagues. We do volleyball, basketball, and we have community events. The Westward Unidos has most recently had a posada in the gym. We have weddings, we have graduation parties, lots of different events. We did Channel 8 broadcast the election. Denver Decides staged a couple of events in our gym. So we try to make it available to the community.
So Larry, what are your operating costs, your annual operating costs for the building? And how do you cover those costs?
Yeah, the maintenance and operating, although we pay, the city raised our rent from $1 to $10 a year, about 1,000% this year. So, I mean, it's kind of sounds like we've got some kind of sweetheart deal there. We pay anywhere between $95,000 and $115,000 a year in maintenance and operating costs. That is utilities, water, repairs. We have been responsible for anything under $7,500. So it's very expensive to operate the building. And with the library, we have charged just whatever it costs to operate based on a per square foot basis. That's pretty much true with the child care center as well. So we actually have to raise close to $50,000 a year. That's, generate 50,000 to 60,000 to cover the maintenance and operating expenses.
And where do the salary costs come from?
I'm sorry?
Your salary costs. How are those?
Our salary costs are mostly covered by grants and programs through Denver Regional Council of Government for our senior programs. We get some money from CHAFA for housing counseling, and we generate money through writing grants. I mean, we get money from foundations and from fundraising, just, people donating to our nonprofit. The last year especially has been tough on nonprofits. And although we increased revenue for food more than $100,000, those food grants don't cover salaries or maintenance and operating costs. So again, it's up to us to raise that extra money. It's any nonprofit that would come in here would have the same, challenges.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Larry. I have one last question for Lisa, and then I'm done. So Lisa, they're scheduled to be out of the building by the end of this year. When will the community engagement process start? How long will that take? And will that be done with an RFP out and a decision made by the end of the year?
That would be the goal, yes, that we are working with Councilwoman Torres so that we can start scheduling those. We wanted to wait until after the new year to schedule some of the sessions so that we could get out there to hear the community. So the anticipated goal would be probably end of second quarter, beginning of third quarter, to have an RFP ready to go to the streets. And once again, SWIC as well as anybody else would be welcome to respond to that. But the goal would be to have then a lease drafted, assuming that we have space and we do an RFP, that SWIC then, or I mean the lease itself, the goal would be to bring it forward in fourth quarter of 2021.
Okay, and in our conversation, you mentioned that in the community engagement process, and we're starting to hear, I don't know about my colleagues, but I got a number of emails from some of the folks who benefit from the programming. My concern is a gap and a loss of service during a period of time from now until getting the RFP done and then figuring out, is it somebody else? Is it SWIC? Who then becomes the managing operator of the building?
If I can respond, at least we are trying to be sensitive to that. And once again, need community input. But what I would say is John had also offered up as it relates to the food bank and the food distribution. Parks and Rec does that now out of certain rec centers. So, you know, should or if we need to make sure that we don't have any gaps, that Parks, I have spoken with Parks about that.
Yeah, part of the problem is there's not a really close by one. I think the closest one is Harvey Park, and then you get down into the Barnum neighborhood.
I mean, we could do it out of the building still.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So basically that's my concern about if there's a desire to continue some of the elements of what SWIC has been doing in the building. You had mentioned there could be a carve out to include them in that. And I don't know what that means, what that looks like, especially if it's somebody different that gets awarded the contract. So can you?
I think that's why we need to have those sessions, because right now I don't think we're prepared to say what that looks like, whether it will still be one provider for the majority of the building, or whether we have a couple agreements with a couple smaller providers that provide very distinct services that the community is looking for. And that's why
somebody will have to be responsible for the actual scheduling, the paying the bills, all of
those are the things internally we would, yes, need to look at and how we structure the RFP. I think that's why this community process first is so important, because it will help us understand what are the needs that we're hearing about, so that we can look to see then what makes sense with this RFP.
What more can be taking place in the building.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. And Larry, please stay with us in case other people have questions. Next up is Councilwoman Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Larry, for joining us today. I want to make sure one thing is very clear, because there have been some echoes of this either in community or on social media. And Lisa, can you confirm there is no plan and there has been no discussion about selling this lot to a private entity or a private developer?
No, absolutely not.
The point behind this is to make sure that the city retains this asset, given it's the only one in the west side that the city owns.
Correct.
Okay. So our office has received a handful of calls and voicemails, and some from folks that utilize SWIC services, and some are from other members of the Westwood community. And there's been quite a bit of questions about the ownership. So just want to make sure a couple other things are clear. Some were under the impression that SWIC already owned the building and were being told to leave. That's not the case, right?
Correct. Yes, correct.
And some were under the impression that SWIC should be allowed to buy the building and the city was not allowing that option. And while that's, I think it sounded like that was true based on the presentation that you made, but the qualification or the justification had been, from my understanding, that the city put bond dollars into this building and then to sell that to whether it's a nonprofit or a church or a private entity, that was what the city decided it did not want to do.
Correct.
Okay. I think the biggest factor here for me, folks, and since I came in, and even before I came in when I was directing the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, Westwood is an important neighborhood. And this is first and foremost about the Westwood Community Center. And I want to make sure that that my intention around this entire conversation is to make sure that that neighborhood is being served as well as it possibly can. And that may be through SWIC, that may be through a lot of the nonprofits that operate within and provide services to Westwood neighbors. I want to play something really quickly that our office received in one of those phone calls, if you'll give me a second.
You get SWIC out of there, the seniors have a place to go. It's ridiculous. And I'm certain, like I said, you are worried so much about illegal, so you're not worried about the American people. The American people put you in the office, not the illegals. You're there to work for us, not the illegals. So we need you to rethink closing SWIC and let it stay where it's at. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure if folks can hear that. It doesn't sound like it. This was one of a really concerning phone calls that our office got about removing SWIC and turning the access to the building over to quote unquote illegals. And Larry, what concerns me about this one call, but other impressions that I have from folks within Westwood that have not been going to the community center in recent years has been because they don't feel welcome there. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about how SWIC welcomes in that space, particularly immigrant residents of Westwood.
Well, obviously we had no knowledge nor did we instigate such a phone call that would, you know, people do crazy things and we had nothing to do with that and would disavow anything that would discriminate against anybody. But we welcome people. We have people that attend here regularly who are Spanish speaking, who don't speak English. We accommodate them. We have staff who speak Spanish, and I struggle with it, but I speak a little bit of Spanish. So we're very welcoming. Westwood Unidos, Paul Casey is the director there, has used this building on numerous occasions for his board meetings. They had an event here. So we welcome people we are intercultural. It's one of our themes here is we're very proud of the fact that we bring cultures together. So I participated in the process that you had to do a bikeway, walkway through Westwood, help to name it. So we're very much part of the community and consider ourselves so.
That I think is one of the things that conversations with residents, that's one of the things that needs to take place. Westwood is one of the most populous neighborhoods, 17,000 residents, 78% are Latino, 62% speak Spanish in the home. Larry, in terms of SWIC's presence, and representation. How many board members does SWIC have?
We have 8 with about to be 9.
Do any of them live in Westwood?
Yes.
Which one? Or ones?
Well, we are about to approve Michelle Warren, whose church is here in Westwood and has been a part of the community for more than 20 years.
Prior to approving this new board member, did anyone live in Westwood?
Yes. Mary Lou Vigil is a community member. She is one of our clients and she is on the board.
She's not listed in your tax information. Is she new?
She's been on the board for about a year.
Okay. I think there's a particular interest in also making sure that Westwood nonprofits get a say in what's happening at this community center as well. And even from them who I during this community process plan to have one-on-one Q&A conversations with about what could happen, whether it's within their services or what they see in need in the neighborhood, what they need to see take place or envision taking place at a community center that serves the entire neighborhood. So that, I think for my colleagues, one of the things that I want to make sure that you all know in terms of process is that we're putting together a Q&A tool where we'd like to have one-on-ones with nonprofits that are based in Westwood, a community-wide survey, and then some small group conversations about generally how a community center can serve Westwood. And I have every indication that folks are going to mention SWIC and the services you provide. I think a lot of people do value and do depend on it, but I think there are going to be some things that come to light that aren't provided right now. And those are some of the things that I think as a responsive and reflective community center, we need to know and we need to be paying attention to, especially as we talk about the growing needs and wanting to make sure residents are not displaced from Westwood, in wanting to make sure youth and young adults have support and things that they need. It's not within my interest to want to see an asset go from the city that we can and should be using more. And I think while you may think it's utilized, the building, it is underutilized in my opinion. And I think there can be more and things that can be improved. So that's one of the things that I hope to bring to this conversation. And I would like it to be done and there to be some indication of future path before this lease is over. I'll end there, and I'm also open to questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman Torres. Next up is Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am not a member of this committee, but I'm attending because of the interest in the subject. I got acquainted with the founder of SWIC, Jammarie Bell, back when she organized it in the mid to late 80s. And of course, I've known Larry for many, many years. So I want to get a better understanding of the evolution of the leasehold there. My understanding is, Lisa, you may not know this, Larry, if you do, I'm going to call on Lisa first. And if she doesn't have that recollection, I'll ask Larry to answer. My understanding is that there was a building on this property in the 70s that was owned by a church in the neighborhood. And when they had difficulty maintaining it, it was donated to the city. Do we have any records on when that occurred, Lisa?
I do not have records, and I will tell you, Councilman, my understanding was that it was a health clinic, not a church. So
right. But it was owned by a church.
I don't know that but I do not have documents supporting that.
Okay. Larry, do you have that? Was that owned by, what church was it?
It was Grace Methodist Church.
Okay.
And it was a community center. The health clinic, I believe, was on the other side of the parking lot.
Okay. Does that original building still exist as part of the complex?
I believe
it was added on.
Right. Okay. So when we looked at that aerial photo, was it the section in the center?
Well, the gymnasium,
like in the front is the library, correct? In the back is the
library is one part of the front. SWIC's offices are also in the front.
Okay.
The aerial was a little bit off.
Okay.
The gymnasium is the oldest part of the building. That would
Right.
be on the east side. And then the center and the front are new.
Okay. And then the building that Mile High Montessori is in right now is on the same property parcel, Lisa?
Correct, correct.
Okay. When
We
was
would
that
have to
built?
split. Pardon me?
When was that built? And is that owned by the city?
It is owned by the city and leased to Mile High Montessori, correct. And I would have to apologize. I don't have the year of construction for that.
Okay. Was that part of the 1998 bond issue, that building?
I know that there have been bond dollars that were put in that, and I can get
Okay.
that information to you if you like.
Okay, I'm trying to understand, and thank you, by the way, Lisa, for talking to me this morning about this, and Larry, I talked to you last week pretty extensively. I'm trying to understand why on earth Dido, the predecessor in interest to this property before real estate, would have even signed a lease in 2010 that included an option to purchase for $10 after putting $3.5 million in taxpayer money into it. Do we have any understanding of why that occurred?
I can't speak to that, and I will tell you the people, involved at that time have since retired or moved on. So real estate inherited like 3, maybe 4 community centers all at that same time period that Dido had tried to move on in different ways and, then said, here, you guys can have them. So I don't have a lot of back history to certain things.
Okay, and my final question, Madam Chair, how many entities operate in that building now, either with SWIC as their landlord, as a subtenant to them, or separately? So Larry, you sublease to Mile High Montessori for some space. Who operates the library? Does Denver Public Library operate that through their staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what other entities are in there? We have the library, we have Mile High Montessori, we have SWIC. Are there any others? That's it.
Full time.
Well, we have an office for interneighborhood cooperation in here as well.
Okay.
INC.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Thanks, Councilman Flynn. Next up is Councilwoman Seda-Baca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions that we've kind of touched on. I'm wondering, Councilman Flynn brought up the subleases or other people in the space. I'm wondering where we can find information about subleasing relationships within the building, the price of those subleases, the split of operations costs. Does that exist somewhere? Does real estate keep track of that?
Well, no, what I would say is the way the 2010 lease was written that they are operating under, they were allowed to, there are certain types of subleasing they would need permission from the city on, and then certain types like Mile High Montessori that they could do directly that we did not know about or see at the time. So, excuse me. So I actually did not know that Mile High Montessori was leasing from them until Larry shared that with me. But that predates Larry.
Got it. So that's something we'll make sure is changed in the leases going forward. I know we have one of these in our district, maybe more, but I've had trouble finding a comprehensive list of this type of property we have throughout the city. Do we have somewhere where real estate tracks the $10 leases that we have throughout the city?
We do have the nominal leases. What I will say, Councilwoman, is this is the last true community center that has a lease like this. And yours, is not exactly the same, but similar in your district. So I think when we spoke more than a year ago, and we were doing this process at the same time in both districts. And those are the last 2.
The last 2. Okay, good to know on that one. What has been the accountability mechanism across the board for making sure that the entities in these leased spaces are doing what they're telling us they're doing?
They are required, all of the nominal leases, to submit their annual reports so that we can make sure that they are meeting the community goals that were established when the lease was written.
And where do those, I've never found those on a Denver Gov website.
I'll send that to you. It's Executive Order 100, Memorandum B. I believe it's B. but I can forward that to you. And so there are certain things that when we are doing a nominal lease, we need to make sure that we have acknowledged and identified, and then, yes, followed up on annual reports, things like that. To that point, though, and I think, the challenge of this conversation today is that, like any lease that we do, we still have a requirement at a certain point to make sure that we have, at a certain period, gone back out to make sure that this is still meeting community needs.
Yeah,
And
I think
communities change, those needs may change.
Yeah, and I appreciate you all trying to bake in that into future processes, because I do think, an entire neighborhood could turn over in 5 years. And so with just the submission of annual reports, you're not really getting the community's input on whether that's still a valuable resource. So I'm hoping that we make sure our leases and requirements going forward include some kind of plan to make sure the neighborhood still wants these things after a certain period of time. I'm also wondering about the decision-making players when the RFP gets issued. Can you explain a little bit about how that process works, and if you anticipate that process or that decision-making structure changing to incorporate community in a different way?
No, like we've talked about with your district, and truthfully, I haven't gotten that far with this particular situation with the RFP, but there would be the community process that we go through and working with Councilwoman Torres's office. And then when the RFP is reviewed, that is reviewed with a multi-agency team internal. We normally do not have and never have had community stakeholders reviewing city contracts because we don't know where the potential is for conflict with that. And so that is why contracts themselves are reviewed internally. But we normally work with the council person up front on the RFP itself, and establishing the criteria when we are reviewing them.
I heard Councilwoman Torres talk a little bit about how she felt that the nonprofits in the neighborhood should have a role, a say-so in what goes into this space. And so I'm hoping that as we move forward on both of the RFPs, this one and the one in my district, we take that into consideration. I know that there are not external people who typically review contracts, but I do think that it's critical to go beyond community input and really have a place for community decision making. And I don't know what we can accommodate to ensure that, but I think that that's critical. And it sounds like Councilwoman Torres is right there as well. On the website, Larry, I'm looking at the board members and none of them are listed. Is this a new website, or where can we learn more about the board members?
Yes, it's a relatively new website. It's about a year old.
Okay.
I've been trying to get my board members to give me pictures so we can put it up, but they've been a little bit shy. I do have a list of board members. I can name them for you. We have, I'll just tell you, we have basically 3 Latinos on our board, 2 Asian Americans. We have people from Ruby Hill. We have a business person from Westwood. We have a resident from Westwood. We have a very diverse board and a very active board. Tony Ohm, who is a Cambodian American, is the chairman of the board. I believe he was on this call. He may be gone now. If I could just, well, go ahead. I'm sorry. I will answer if you let me have just a final statement. But I'd be glad to share the board members and their background. I'll put that out to all the council members.
Awesome. Well, that's it for my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman Seda-Baca. Next up is Councilwoman Kinich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilwoman Seda-Baca asked most of the questions I had about the sublease and about the Mile High Montessori, but then something you said left me hanging, which was you were going to approach it differently in the lease, but I didn't catch the detail. So how much how much is SWIC benefiting from rent from Mile High Montessori right now? And how much will they be allowed to charge? Or is the city going to take over any of that revenue stream in the revised lease that we'll be voting on?
Councilwoman, I know that it's a stepped, it increases each year, so Larry may have to confirm the actual number, but the lease that I received, and I had to estimate what the square footage would be on 2 classrooms. It looks like they're paying about $30 a square foot.
I'm sorry, that doesn't help me.
Oh,
What does that mean, a month or a year?
I'm sorry, so they're paying, Larry, approximately, it looks like 24 to maybe 20, somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 right now per year.
My understanding is it's about 2,000
per month.
Per month.
That was what it was. I'm sorry.
The lease was executed in 2014 before I came here. It does include, however, in practicality, they use our Eagle Bear room, our kitchen, and our gymnasium. So it gives them the use of the facilities, including bathrooms. And then there are 2 bathrooms that are devoted entirely to the children.
So they come across the parking lot to go to the bathroom?
No, they're in the building. For the kids that are in the building using the classrooms, they also have the use of the outdoor area as a playground as well, and it's about $2,000 a month. You know, go ahead.
What I was going to say is Mile High Montessori, the 2 classrooms inside SWIC, those are only September through May, so it's not a full year.
But then the other building is
a year-round. They use them in the summer too.
Okay.
They do use them in the summer.
Okay. Sorry. And then how does the new lease handle this?
You
said it's changing, but you didn't say what it's going to say.
I think what Councilwoman Sita Baca, if I'm not mistaken, was saying is going forward with an RFP of any kind across the city, we would look at subleasing a little bit differently and probably have more approvals in place right up front. This agreement today that we have in front of you for approval is keeping, for the most part, everything the same. It's acknowledging that Mile High Montessori is there and that they are leasing to them and that the library is within the premises of the building.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I think it's, I understand we're in a transition period and I think childcare is an essential service. And I think, I don't know what a childcare center in a different city building would be paying, if they'd be paying less or, but it's one thing to be utilizing a city building cost-free. It's another thing to be generating revenue off of it. And I'm not sure that I realized that was going on either. And I've been involved in this for a little longer because of how long I've been on the council, but I'm not sure the last time I saw this, that this was made clear to me how that worked. So, but I also recognize we are where we are. And so, but I just want to, share that I'm a little uncomfortable with this piece of this. And I think that, we commonly don't see these documents when we're voting on them at committee. I think I need to see this one. So I'll be ready to move it to the floor today, but I'm going to ask that we get a copy of the actual lease ASAP. Because I may have more questions. And sorry, that was all, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Knich. Next up is Council President Gilmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lisa, on the new lease, why or are the subleases going to be included as addendums to the lease? I guess I'm confused as to one, by them subleasing it, that was in violation of the city's lease terms, and understanding that we're a bit further down the road, but for transparency's sake, it seems like the subleases should be included with the city lease as at least an addendum. And are we assured that those subleasees are holding the appropriate liability insurance that the city requires within our lease arrangements?
So let me speak to one thing right now. They are not in violation. SWIC is not in violation with Mile High Montessori, the sublease. The way the document was written that they have been in holdover under, it was that they had the right, and Brad Beck should be in the queue if you'd like to speak to Brad Beck, but they basically had the right to automatically use 60% of it for nonprofits or other governmental entities. So within that,
Well, but that's very different to use it versus signing a lease. And I mean, we don't need to get into if, you know, the wherefore all, I'm not necessarily concerned about that. I'm concerned about going forward. Are we going to codify those subleases somewhere to make
Yes.
sure that if something happens, everybody is covered with the appropriate insurance? And then the other piece is in this lease, because we haven't seen it, and I share that same ask as Councilwoman Kniech. I'd like to see a copy of it before we vote on it. I know it's standard in many of our leases that the city can initiate a termination earlier than the term of the lease without any cause, or just there's a notice required. But the city does maintain that ability in the new lease. Is that correct?
yes, and we can make sure you see it in the recitals of the new lease. That is where it does call out Mile High Montessori as the subtenant. So it is acknowledging it right now. And we do have their certificate of insurance. We make sure of that because they're next door as well. But that
Okay, great. And
was the only sublease that we're acknowledging. That's the only one.
okay, and how many other subleases are there?
That's it for regular that I'm aware of. It's just
Okay.
Mile High Montessori and the library, which is not considered a true sublease. It's in our space.
Okay, gotcha. And then Larry, I had a question. I was also on your website, and there isn't any information on there regarding your operating budget, your annual operating budget, your IRS 990, that sort of information. Is there a place that I could find that information just to learn a little bit more about your organization? And you know, you've got about $30,000 in earned income for your nonprofit that could go against some of the 95,000 that you said early on that you pay out for utilities, water, and repairs. And so it'd just be helpful for me to learn a little bit more about your nonprofit and get a copy of your 990, or where I can go to find your finances.
So we are audited independently every year, and I can, and our 990s are filed. You know, there are websites that you can access 990s. We did not put them on our website. I'd be happy to send you our audited financials for the last couple of years. We, of course, have not done 2020, but be happy to send you the 990s and the audited financial statements. We're completely transparent and accountable. I just would say that, you know, certainly the money that Mile High Montessori pays us, none of that I know of goes towards salaries. It all goes towards overhead. We're not getting rich on that. It's not out of, I mean, we have not raised their rent, I don't think, in 2 or 3 years. So what we do get from Mile High Montessori helps to cover the costs. I didn't negotiate that contract. And in regard to being open to other nonprofits coming in, it may be that space, which is classroom space, could be made into offices and could be used maybe more to the community's benefit. But keep in mind that Mile High Montessori, they have a big building, and evidently they need more space. So I'm not sure where they would put those kids if they weren't here. I'm not saying that it couldn't be done, we're open to all kinds of possibilities.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, and I'll look forward to that financial information. It's just helpful. Usually it's a common thing that nonprofits, especially when you're fundraising, will be transparent and put that information out there. So
Absolutely.
Look forward to receiving an email about that. All right. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council President Gilmore. I just wanted to follow up one thing before I go to the next council person. Larry, you also mentioned that there are leagues in the gym and that you have events in the gym. Are those all people that pay a fee to use your gym?
Not all. We have a rental schedule, which is kind of modeled on, we kind of look at what they're doing and the kind of organization it is as to how much they pay. If it's an adult league where they really are not a nonprofit organization, they would pay the full amount of rent. If it's a nonprofit organization, they get a 30% discount, depending on the amount of time they use it, the frequency. So we have a kind of a graduated fee structure. I believe when Westward Unidas used it for a posada, I can grant free use of space for a very, very low discounted amount. Churches, for example, if they wanted to use the space, might get a discount. So we don't, even our rental fee for the gym right now, which is $60 an hour, that's the top rate, is very, very low. $60 an hour for the gym, the lights, the heat, equipment, all of that goes with it.
Thank you. Next up is Councilman Hines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to make echo Councilmember Kanich's and other members' concerns about the relationship, the sub-relationship. I just want to point out, this isn't specifically about SWIC. This is more just the way Denver does business with nonprofits that then make more money than, so I mean, this is a city-owned property, and certainly there are times when it is in the people's best interest for us to give very low lease rates, like $1 or $10 or even as much as $20 a year. And I'm fine, and I understand that happens. The concern that I have that I'm picking up from other colleagues, again, this isn't specific to any individual entity, is just that then there would be another relationship that would be far above and beyond that lease rate that is memorialized in a contract because of a sublease. That's concerning to me, and so I just wanted to throw that out there, that we don't want to have a nonprofit make a profit as we are basically giving city assets away to a particular entity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Hines. And I've got Councilwoman Kanich back up.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify. So looking at the map, there are two buildings within one colored square, and then there's a yellow one. So does this lease cover both 980 and 1000?
No, just 1000 South.
Okay, so when we've been talking about Mile High Montessori, this is where I thought I learned something new, but I'm unlearning it. We're not including the building that's labeled Mile High Montessori. That's not the building we're talking about.
Correct.
We're talking about them. They own that parcel free and clear.
The city owns it and leases it to them.
Okay, so, all right. All right, I'm just gonna say it back to you because I think that got muddled. There are two buildings. The city owns both. One is leased directly to Mile High Montessori. One is leased to SWIC, and then SWIC is subleasing a couple classrooms in that building. This discussion is just about that building 1000, not 980.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Well,
the only reason I showed you the whole parcel is because it is one parcel owned by the city and county of Denver, and it does have a relationship together in all of it.
Absolutely. And I think that is why it's especially critical that we're bringing this era to an end, because the site and its potential to serve the city's needs, and given it needs to be thought of as a whole, not one building for one organization and one for another. It's a site. So thank you for clarifying that. No further questions.
Thank you. And next up is Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lisa, can you tell us how much the city charges Mile High Montessori to lease the property on the north part of that park?
It is a nominal lease. So I will say, old school was $1. All leases are moving forward to being $10 a year. That's based on case law, but it is considered a nominal lease. And that is done.
Is that the same with Neighborhood House? They lease that property as well? It's the same.
Yes.
And they cover the operating costs, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And that is done as a service agreement in conjunction with the Mayor's Office of Children Affairs.
Okay. And we provide Denver preschool program dollars. We have other resources that we as a city help offset costs for daycare services in the city. Okay. So I just want to make a couple points that I think are important to mention. So the city historically has owned some of these community properties. We had the old Elyria School building that was sold to, at the time, El Centro Su Teatro. And I sat on the selection committee reviewing the proposals that were submitted as the council person of the district. So the precedent is there that at least maybe not community people, but at least the council person of the district has been involved in the review. We had the Northside Community Center, which the city sold to Rocky Mountain SARE. And they also have a Mile High Montessori on their property. It's a separate building on that parcel. SWIC had this long-term lease. We also had the Curtis Park Community Center, the church in the Globeville neighborhood. And a number of these properties were purchased with community development block grant funds. And it's also part of why the city was looking at handing them off. In some cases, they did renovations on some of the properties before they turned them over, either by sale or by long-term lease, or they, held on to them. And in a couple of cases, the contractual relationship with the operator just didn't work out because it's expensive to operate these big buildings, and we can't expect whoever is going to run and operate them to not be able to generate revenue to cover their costs. I mean, it's just a reality. And in the case where we have other sources that the city provides, like daycare, that makes sense, so that we have a way to cover some of those costs for those operators. So I just wanted to clarify those points. I think it was an important part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ortega. And next up, I had Councilwoman Sarabaca, but I see your hand is down. Did you want to ask anything else?
Councilwoman Ortega asked the question about Mile High's lease.
Oh, okay. All right.
For somebody to move this, I'm happy to move it.
Okay. If nobody has any other questions or comments, Councilwoman Ortega is making a motion to move it forward. Does someone have a second?
Second.
A second from Councilman Hines. Any objections to moving this forward? All right, well, we will move this forward to the full council. Thank you, everyone, for the great discussion. Thank you, Larry, for joining us, and Lisa for always being here to answer